The morning of the wedding dawned shrouded in mist, as if the heavens themselves hesitated to witness this forced union. The dew clung to the stone steps of St. Agnes Chapel like tears upon marble, reluctant to be swept away by the procession that would soon arrive. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb stood before her chamber mirror, her reflection a portrait of quiet resignation. The simple ivory gown, unadorned save for a modest lace at the collar, hung from her slender frame like a flag of surrender. Her mother's pearls, the last remnant of their once prosperous estate, rested cold against her throat. "It is time, my lady," came the whispered voice of her maid, Martha, who had served the Whitcombs since before Eleanor's birth and would not abandon her even now when all else was lost. Eleanor nodded, unable to find words adequate for the occasion. What language could properly convey the sacrifice of oneself upon the altar of necessity? What poetry might capture the particular ache of trading one's freedom for the settlement of a father's debts? The carriage journey passed in stifling silence. Through the window, Eleanor glimpsed the rolling hills of Whitcomb Park, lands that had belonged to her family for generations, now forfeit to creditors, and soon to be reclaimed through this most ancient form of commerce, the trading of a daughter. "So your father would be grateful," offered Lady Agatha, Eleanor's aunt and guardian since her parents' passing 3 winters prior. "The Duke of Winter is a man of great consequence, and greater coldness, they say," Eleanor replied, her voice barely audible above the carriage wheels. Lady Agatha's lips pressed into a thin line. "Better a cold husband with warm hearths than a passionate pauper, child. The Duke will restore your position in society, while I surrender my heart to eternal winter. Hearts are luxuries, Eleanor. You have always been too fanciful for your own welfare." The chapel loomed ahead, its grey spire piercing the mist like an accusation against heaven. Eleanor clutched her small prayer book, another remnant of happier days, and steeled herself against the trembling that threatened to overtake her limbs. The ancient doors groaned open. Organ notes hung in the air, solemn and inevitable as judgment. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed upon the stone floor as she proceeded down the aisle, counting each step as if they were the final moments of her true self. At the altar stood the Duke of Winter, Edmund Hale, tall and imposing in his formal attire, not a thread out of place, not a hair disturbed by emotion. His reputation had spread throughout the county long before his arrival. Widowed young, he had retreated into rigid propriety and cold efficiency, managing his vast estates with the precision of a general and the warmth of winter frost. He was respected, feared, obeyed, but never loved. Eleanor curtsied, her head bowed low, refusing to meet the gaze of the man to whom she was being delivered. The vicar's words washed over her like distant waves, vows, promises, commitments exchanged between strangers. "I, Eleanor Catherine Whitcomb." Her voice faltered but did not break. Lady Agatha had taught her well the art of dignity in defeat. The Duke's responses came measured and precise, as if he was signing a property deed rather than binding himself to a living, breathing woman. "I, Edmund James Hale, Duke of Winter." When the rings were exchanged, his gloved hand barely brushed against hers, a touch so fleeting it might never have happened at all. Eleanor felt the cold metal against her finger, a shackle disguised as jewelry, weighing heavier than its modest size should allow. The ceremony concluded with terrible swiftness. No celebratory bells rang out, no cheers echoed through the chapel. Only the scrape of the quill as they signed the marriage registry marked the transformation of Lady Eleanor Whitcomb into the Duchess of Winter. As they processed from the chapel, Eleanor kept her gaze demurely lowered, as befitted both her station and her sentiment. The small gathering of witnesses, mostly the Duke's associates and a handful of distant relatives, offered polite acknowledgements rather than congratulations. They had nearly reached the Duke's imposing carriage when he suddenly paused, causing Eleanor to halt in her careful steps. "A moment," he said, the first words he had spoken to her outside the formal responses of the ceremony. Eleanor glanced up, startled by the interruption to the choreographed proceedings. The Duke reached inside his coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in cream-colored linen, secured with a pale blue ribbon. "This belongs to you," he stated simply, extending the package toward her. Confusion flickered across Eleanor's features as she accepted the offering, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the fine fabric wrapping. "Open it," he instructed, his voice neither warm nor cold, merely expectant. With careful movements, Eleanor untied the ribbon and unfolded the delicate wrapping. Inside lay a silver locket, tarnished by age but unmistakable in its design. an oval pendant engraved with intertwining roses, containing the miniature portrait of a woman with kind eyes and Eleanor's own gentle smile. Her mother's locket, sold years ago to pay for her father's mounting debts after his illness. The last portrait of Lady Catherine Whitcomb, thought lost forever to a collector's anonymous hands. Eleanor's breath caught. Her fingers closed around the precious metal, feeling its familiar weight and contours. "How did you—" she began, but words failed her as the first tear slipped unbidden down her cheek, followed swiftly by another. The Duke said nothing, merely observing her with an expression that, for the briefest moment, suggested something beyond cold calculation, perhaps curiosity, perhaps something deeper still. "The carriage awaits, Your Grace," came the voice of the Duke's valet, interrupting the strange tableau. Eleanor quickly composed herself, wiping away the evidence of her momentary vulnerability. Yet, as she stepped into the carriage that would carry her to Winter Hall, her new home, her gilded cage, the locket remained clutched tightly in her palm, a single warm point in the winter of her new life. The carriage door closed with a decisive click. The horses moved forward. But something had altered in the space between ceremony and departure, a shift as subtle as the changing direction of the wind, yet no less portentous for its subtlety. The rain began to fall. Winter Hall emerged from the morning fog like a spectre, imposing, austere, its grey stone facade unrelieved by ornament or frivolity. The carriage wheels crunched upon the gravel drive, announcing their arrival with sombre percussion. Eleanor gazed through the window, studying what was now to be her home. The manor sprawled across the landscape, its wings extending like arms prepared to enclose her in their cold embrace. Gardens, once perhaps magnificent, now stood ordered with military precision, not a bloom out of place, not a leaf daring to stray from its appointed position. The Duke sat opposite her, his posture unyielding, his gaze directed beyond the carriage window rather than at his new bride. He had spoken not a word since the presentation of the locket, which now hung around Eleanor's neck, concealed beneath the high collar of her gown but warm against her skin, a secret comfort in this alien world. When the carriage halted at the front entrance, a line of servants emerged, arranging themselves with practiced precision. The Duke descended first, then extended a gloved hand to assist Eleanor, a gesture of propriety rather than tenderness. "Mrs. Winter's my housekeeper," he stated as an older woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward and curtsied deeply. "She will acquaint you with the household." "Your Grace," Mrs. Winters acknowledged, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts regarding her new mistress. "I have correspondence that requires my attention," the Duke continued, addressing Eleanor with formal detachment. "Dinner is served at 7 precisely. Mrs. Winters will show you to your chambers." With that pronouncement, he strode away, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors of the entrance hall. Eleanor stood momentarily abandoned, a stranger in what was supposedly her own home, the weight of her new title settling upon her shoulders like an ill-fitting garment. "This way, Your Grace," Mrs. Winters prompted, her tone respectful but distant. Eleanor followed, conscious of the servants' curious glances as they passed. The corridors of Winter Hall stretched before her, adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and landscapes rendered in muted tones. No cheerful colors brightened these walls, no evidence of feminine touch softened the severe elegance of the furnishings. "The family apartments are in the East Wing," Mrs. Winters explained as they ascended a broad staircase. "His Grace occupies the suite at the far end of the corridor. Your chambers are here." She opened a door to reveal a sitting room, appointed with furniture of impeccable quality but austere design. Beyond lay a bedchamber with a massive four-poster bed draped in blue silk, and further still, a dressing room already arranged, with Eleanor's modest collection of gowns and personal items, transported ahead of her arrival. "The bell pull summons your lady's maid," Mrs. Winters continued. "His Grace has employed a suitable young woman from the village to attend you, as I understood you did not bring personal staff." "Only Martha, who raised me," Eleanor replied softly. "I hope she has been made comfortable." A flicker of surprise crossed Mrs. Winters' features. "She has been assigned quarters with the upper servants, Your Grace. Is there anything else you require at present?" Eleanor shook her head, suddenly overwhelmed by the strangeness of her circumstances. "Not at present, thank you, Mrs. Winters." Left alone, Eleanor moved to the window, which overlooked the formal gardens. The rain had ceased, leaving the landscape glistening under a reluctant sun. She touched the locket at her throat, drawing strength from its presence. A soft knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. "Enter," she called, composing her features into a mask of ducal dignity. The door opened to reveal a woman, perhaps 10 years her senior, elegantly dressed in lavender silk, her golden grey hair arranged in a sophisticated coiffure. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as the Duke's, studied Eleanor with undisguised interest. "So you are Edmund's bride?" the woman declared, advancing into the room with confident grace. "I am Lady Augusta Hale, your new sister-in-law. I've come to welcome you properly, as my brother seems to have neglected his duties in that regard." Eleanor curtsied, uncertain of the proper protocol. "You are most kind, Lady Augusta. Augusta, please, when we are private. We are family now, after all." She settled herself upon a chair, arranging her skirts with practiced ease. "Come, sit with me. You must be overwhelmed by all this cold ceremony." Cautiously, Eleanor took the seat opposite. "I confess, it is not what I expected." "Few things at Winter Hall are what one expects," Augusta replied with a wry smile. "Including my brother, though his reputation for frost is not entirely undeserved." She leaned forward slightly. "I saw him give you something at the chapel. May I inquire what it was that provoked such emotion?" Eleanor's hand instinctively rose to the locket. "He returned something I thought lost forever, my mother's portrait." Augusta's expression softened. "How extraordinary. Edmund is many things, but sentimental has never been among them. I cannot fathom how he obtained it," Eleanor admitted, "or why he would trouble himself with such a gesture." "Perhaps there is more to my brother than society perceives," Augusta suggested, studying Eleanor with new interest. "Or perhaps you have awakened something long dormant." She rose gracefully. "I shall leave you to rest before dinner, but know that you have at least one ally in this mausoleum. Edmund may rule Winter Hall, but I have survived its chill longer than anyone." After Augusta's departure, Eleanor removed the locket, examining it in the pale afternoon light. It was indeed her mother's. The slight dent on the left side, the almost imperceptible scratch across the engraving, these were details no counterfeit could replicate. How had the Duke come to possess it? What purpose had he in returning it? Was it merely a calculated gesture designed to ensure her compliance, or something more profound? The arrival of a young maid, Alice, she introduced herself, interrupted Eleanor's musings. The girl helped her change from her wedding gown into a dinner dress of deep blue silk, one of the few quality garments remaining from her former life. As Alice arranged her hair, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The locket gleamed against her skin, a reminder of all she had lost and the strange gift she had received in the midst of her surrender. "You look beautiful, Your Grace," Alice offered shyly. "Thank you, Alice," Eleanor replied, rising from the dressing table. "I believe it is time to face my new household." The dinner gong sounded, its resonance echoing through the corridors like a herald of battle. Eleanor squared her shoulders, touched the locket once more for courage, and stepped into the hall. At the bottom of the grand staircase stood the Duke, his expression inscrutable as he watched her descend. In his hand, he held a single white rose. Dinner at Winter Hall proceeded with the precision of a military campaign. Footmen moved in silent coordination, presenting each course with flawless timing. Crystal gleamed under candlelight. Silver service reflected the flames in distorted patterns across damask tablecloths. Yet despite the grandeur of the setting, only 3 places were laid at the immense mahogany table. The Duke at its head, Eleanor to his right, and Lady Augusta opposite her. "I've instructed cook to prepare a selection of dishes," the Duke stated, breaking the silence that had persisted since they entered the dining room. "You will inform Mrs. Winters of your preferences, so future menus may be adjusted accordingly." "Thank you, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, struggling to reconcile this cold efficiency with the man who had returned her mother's locket. The white rose he had presented at the foot of the staircase now lay beside her plate, another gesture at odds with his frigid demeanor. "Must we persist with such formality, Edmund?" Augusta interjected, her tone light but her gaze pointed. "You are husband and wife now, not diplomatic envoys from hostile nations." The Duke's expression remained impassive. "Formality provides structure, Augusta. I believe the Duchess appreciates clarity in her new position." "The Duchess has a name," Augusta countered. "One might occasionally employ it." A muscle tensed in the Duke's jaw, but his voice remained controlled. "Eleanor, then, does the arrangement of your chambers meet with your approval?" The sudden use of her given name startled Eleanor more than the question itself. "Yes, they are most comfortable. Thank you for your consideration." "It was no great effort. The chambers have stood ready since the announcement of our engagement." Augusta sighed audibly. "My brother's talent for romance continues to astound." Eleanor observed the siblings' exchange with cautious interest. Their familiarity with one another's barbs suggested long practice, Yet beneath Augusta's teasing lay genuine affection and perhaps concern. "I understand you enjoy reading, Eleanor," Augusta continued, clearly determined to extract some semblance of normal conversation from the stilted atmosphere. "Edmund's library is quite impressive, though woefully underutilized. Perhaps you might breathe some life into those neglected volumes." "The library is at your disposal," the Duke confirmed, "as are the music room and conservatory. Winter Hall is your home now. You may occupy yourself as you wish, provided proper decorum is maintained." "How magnificently generous," murmured Augusta, earning a sharp glance from her brother. Eleanor lowered her gaze to her barely touched plate. "I am grateful for such liberty, Your Grace. I fear I have brought little of value to this union. Save my name." Something flickered in the Duke's expression, a brief disturbance in his careful composure. "Your name is Hale now, and the value of what you have brought remains to be determined." The conversation faltered, giving way to the delicate sounds of silver against porcelain. Eleanor found herself studying the Duke when he was engaged with his plate, or responding to his sister's occasional remarks. His features were undeniably handsome. Strong jaw, straight nose, well-defined brow, yet they seemed carved from marble rather than formed of flesh. Only his eyes suggested depths beneath the surface, blue as winter ice, yet harboring shadows that hinted at concealed turbulence. As the final course was cleared, the Duke addressed Eleanor directly once more. "Tomorrow, I shall acquaint you with the estate accounts and household ledgers. As Duchess, certain responsibilities will fall to you." "I am prepared to fulfill my duties," Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Excellent. We shall begin after breakfast." He rose from his chair, signaling the end of the meal. "If you will excuse me, I have correspondence to complete before retiring." With a formal bow, he departed, leaving Eleanor alone with Augusta, who immediately released another sigh. "You must forgive my brother's manner," she said, moving to occupy the chair beside Eleanor. "Since Arabella's death, he has retreated behind walls of propriety and duty." "Arabella?" Eleanor inquired carefully. "His first wife." Augusta's expression grew somber. "She died 7 years ago after only 2 years of marriage. Edmund has never spoken of it, not even to me." Eleanor twisted the wedding band on her finger, this new knowledge settling uncomfortably upon her conscience. "I was not aware." "Few are. Edmund ensured the matter was handled with utmost discretion." Augusta placed her hand gently over Eleanor's. "I tell you this not to distress you, but because understanding may prove your greatest ally in this house." "And did he—" Eleanor hesitated, uncertain how to phrase her question. "Love her?" Augusta finished. "I believe he did, in his way. Edmund has never given himself easily to emotion, even before grief hardened him further." She smiled sadly. "But he is not incapable of feeling, merely cautious with it." Eleanor nodded, her thoughts returning to the locket and the rose, small gestures that now seemed even more significant in light of this revelation. "Come," Augusta said, rising. "Let us retire to the drawing room. I shall play for you, and you can tell me of your accomplishments, which I suspect are far greater than you have been permitted to acknowledge." The evening passed more pleasantly in Augusta's company. Music filled the drawing room, as Augusta demonstrated considerable skill at the pianoforte, coaxing Eleanor to join her in a duet. For brief moments, the oppressive atmosphere of Winter Hall receded, allowing glimpses of what life might become, if not for the shadows that seemed to cling to every corner. Later, as Eleanor prepared for bed with Alice's assistance, her thoughts returned to the Duke, to Edmund, as she must learn to think of him. What manner of man presented his unwanted bride with her mother's treasured locket, then retreated behind impenetrable formality? What pain lay beneath his frozen exterior? And what might emerge if that ice were to thaw? "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" Alice asked, having completed the nightly rituals of brushing and braiding Eleanor's hair. "No, thank you, Alice. You may retire." Left alone, Eleanor approached the window. The night was clear now, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on midnight silk. She unclasped the locket, opening it to gaze upon her mother's gentle face. "What am I to make of him, Mother?" she whispered. "What am I to make of any of this?" A soft knock interrupted her contemplation. Hastily fastening the locket around her neck once more, she called, "Enter." The door opened to reveal not Alice returned with some forgotten item, but the Duke himself, still fully dressed despite the late hour. "Forgive the intrusion," he said stiffly, remaining at the threshold. "I wish to ensure you have everything you require." Eleanor straightened, acutely conscious of her state of undress, though her nightgown and wrapper revealed nothing improper. "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been most attentive." The Duke nodded. his gaze travelling briefly to the locket at her throat before returning to her face. "The rose, was it to your liking?" The unexpected question caught Eleanor off guard. "It was beautiful," she answered truthfully, "though I confess I did not understand its purpose." "It has no purpose beyond itself," he replied. "My mother cultivated that variety. They bloom rarely, even in the conservatory." Before Eleanor could respond to this startling revelation, he inclined his head in a formal gesture. "Rest well, Eleanor. Tomorrow begins your life as Duchess of Windsor in earnest." He closed the door, leaving Eleanor staring at the space he had occupied, the implications of his visit and his words settling around her like delicate petals falling from an unexpected bloom. Outside her window, a nightingale began to sing. Morning light filtered through the silk damask curtains of Eleanor's chamber, casting muted patterns across the polished floor. She had risen early, determined to present herself as befitted her new station. Alice had arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style and dressed her in a gown of sage green that lent colour to her otherwise pale complexion. The locket remained at her throat, a small rebellion perhaps, but one she felt entitled to maintain. Its presence gave her courage as she descended to the breakfast room where the Duke awaited, his tall figure silhouetted against the window that overlooked the eastern gardens. "Good morning, Your Grace," Eleanor greeted him, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves beneath her composed exterior. He turned, acknowledging her with a slight inclination of his head. "Eleanor, I trust you slept well." "Yes, thank you." She took her place at the table as a footman appeared silently to serve her tea. "The accommodations are most comfortable. I am gratified to hear it." The Duke resumed his seat, returning his attention to the newspaper beside his plate. "After breakfast, we shall review the household accounts in my study. Mrs. Winters has prepared a summary of current expenses and staff responsibilities for your examination." Eleanor sipped her tea, observing her husband from beneath lowered lashes. In daylight, the severe lines of his face appeared somewhat softened, though no less imposing. She noted the precise manner in which he handled his cutlery, the careful way he folded the newspaper when finished, every movement deliberate and controlled. "May I inquire after your plans for the day?" she ventured, seeking to establish some semblance of normal marital discourse. The Duke looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features at the question. "I have estate matters to attend to this afternoon. The tenant at Northfield Farm requires consultation regarding drainage issues." "I see." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "Perhaps, when you have concluded your business, you might show me the grounds. I should like to become better acquainted with Winter's environs." Something indefinable shifted in his expression, not quite softening, but a momentary breach in his perfect composure. "That would be acceptable, weather permitting." The breakfast concluded with little further conversation. Shortly thereafter, Eleanor found herself in the Duke's study, a handsome room lined with leather-bound volumes and dominated by an imposing desk of polished mahogany. Maps of the estate hung upon one wall. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors gazed down from another. "The Windsor estates encompass approximately 12,000 acres, the Duke explained, spreading a detailed map before her. "The main property surrounds the hall with outlying farms and several villages under our jurisdiction." Eleanor studied the map with genuine interest. "It is a considerable responsibility. Indeed, one that has belonged to my family for 15 generations. Pride colored his voice, the first real emotion she had detected since their marriage. "As Duchess, you will oversee the household budget, staff appointments, and certain charitable obligations." He presented her with a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with meticulous notations in a precise hand. "Mrs. Winters has maintained these records admirably, but such duties properly belong to the lady of the house." Eleanor accepted the ledger, conscious of the weight of both the physical book and the responsibility it represented. "I shall endeavour to uphold the standards of Winter Hall." "I have no doubt of your capability," he replied, surprising her. "Your aunt spoke highly of your management of Whitcomb Park, despite its difficulties." The reference to her family's financial ruin brought a flush of shame to Eleanor's cheeks. "We managed as best we could, under the circumstances." The Duke observed her reaction with inscrutable eyes. "I intended no criticism. Quite the contrary. Your dignity in adversity is commendable." Before Eleanor could formulate a response to this unexpected praise, the study door opened after a perfunctory knock. A tall man entered, elegantly attired in a riding coat of fine burgundy cloth, his handsome features arranged in an expression of practiced charm. "Winter, "I've come to pay my respects to your bride," the newcomer announced, his voice carrying the cultured tones of London society. The Duke stiffened visibly. "Crowell, I was not aware we had arranged a meeting." "Hence the pleasure of surprise," the man replied, his smile unwavering as he turned his attention to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor, forgive me, Duchess, how enchanting you appear in your new role." Eleanor recognized him with a jolt of dismay. Sir Adrian Crowell had been among her most persistent suitors before her father's death and the family's subsequent disgrace. His attentions had cooled considerably once her dowry evaporated, though his manner had remained unfailingly polite whenever their paths crossed in society. "Sir Adrian," she acknowledged, rising from her chair with as much grace as she could muster. "How unexpected to see you at Winter Hall." "I could hardly fail to congratulate my dear friend on his marriage," Adrian replied, executing a flawless bow. "Though I confess, Winter, you kept your intentions remarkably close." The announcement quite startled county society. "My affairs are not conducted for society's entertainment," the Duke replied coolly. Adrian laughed, undeterred by the frosty reception. "As formidable as ever. But surely you'll not begrudge an old acquaintance a moment with your bride? Lady Eleanor and I are well known to one another from happier days." Eleanor did not miss the slight narrowing of the Duke's eyes at this declaration. "Indeed," he said, his tone revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Then I shall leave you to reacquaint yourselves, while I inform Mrs. Winters we shall have a guest for luncheon." He departed with a formal bow, leaving Eleanor alone with their unexpected visitor. The moment the door closed, Adrian's demeanor shifted subtly, his smile acquiring a sharper edge. "Well, well, the rumors are true," he murmured, moving closer. "Little Eleanor Whitcomb, risen from the ashes of disgrace to become a duchess. How remarkably fortunate." Eleanor maintained her composure with effort. "Fortune had little to do with it, Sir Adrian." "No? Then perhaps you'll enlighten me as to how the daughter of a ruined gentleman secured one of the most eligible peers in England." His gaze travelled to the locket at her throat. "A pretty trinket." "A wedding gift from your illustrious husband." "It was my mother's," Eleanor replied, resisting the urge to conceal the locket from his prying eyes. "Of course." His smile did not reach his eyes. "How sentimental. I would not have credited the Duke with such tenderness. There is much about my husband that might surprise you." "Is there indeed?" Adrian's tone made the innocent query sound like an accusation. "How fascinating that you should discover his hidden depth so quickly. One might almost suspect prior acquaintance." The implication hung in the air between them, as offensive as it was absurd. Eleanor straightened, drawing upon every lesson in dignity Lady Agatha had instilled in her. "If you have come to insult me in my own home, Sir Adrian, you will find your welcome swiftly withdrawn." "Insult? My dear Duchess, I merely observe what others might wonder." He stepped back, his expression settling once more into practiced charm as the door reopened to admit the Duke. "Ah, Winter, returned to rescue your bride from my poor attempts at conversation. How gallant." The Duke's gaze moved between them, noting Eleanor's rigid posture and the high colour in her cheeks. "If you have distressed the Duchess, Crowell, I suggest you offer an immediate apology." "Distress? Nothing could be further from my intention." Adrian spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were merely reminiscing about mutual acquaintances. Isn't that so, Your Grace?" Eleanor found herself caught between truth and pride. To admit Adrian's insinuations would create precisely the sort of awkwardness he clearly intended. "Sir Adrian was expressing his surprise at our match," she said carefully, as might be expected given the circumstances. The Duke's expression remained unreadable, but Eleanor sensed a tension in his bearing that had not been present before. "Indeed, perhaps we might continue this discussion over luncheon. The Duchess and I have matters to conclude here first." The dismissal was unmistakable. Adrian bowed with exaggerated deference. "Of course, I shall await your convenience in the drawing-room, if I may." After his departure, silence descended upon the study. Eleanor stood by the window, struggling to compose herself, acutely aware of the Duke's scrutiny. "What did he say to disturb you?" The question came abruptly, devoid of preamble. Eleanor hesitated. "Nothing of consequence." "You are not an accomplished liar, Eleanor. It does you credit, but it renders your distress transparent." She turned to face him, surprised by the directness of his observation. "He implied impropriety in our match, that some prior connection must exist between us to explain your choice of a bride." The Duke's expression darkened momentarily. "Crowell's insinuations reflect his own character, not yours." "Nevertheless, they will be echoed elsewhere," Eleanor replied. Your choice of a bride without fortune or powerful connections will raise questions. Let them question. I am not accountable to idle gossips. Eleanor studied him, searching for the motivation behind his apparent indifference to scandal. May I ask why then? Why choose me when you might have had any lady of suitable rank? For a moment she thought he might actually answer. Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of emotion quickly suppressed. Instead, he moved to the desk, gathering the papers they had been reviewing. We shall continue this discussion tomorrow. I believe luncheon awaits. As they walked together toward the dining room, Eleanor was acutely conscious of the space between them, physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm she had yet to bridge. Yet she had glimpsed something beneath the Duke's frozen exterior, a capacity for anger in her defense, however restrained its expression. Behind them, a clock chimed 12. The rose from the previous evening, which Eleanor had placed in a small vase upon the study mantel, shed its first petal in silent witness. The afternoon stretched interminably as Eleanor endured Sir Adrian's prolonged visit. Following a luncheon during which the conversation remained superficially pleasant but underlaid with tension, the Duke excused himself to attend to the estate business he had mentioned at breakfast, leaving Eleanor to entertain their unwelcome guest. "How gallantly your husband abandons you to my company," Adrian observed as they took tea in the small salon. "One might almost suspect he seeks to provide us opportunity for private conversation." Eleanor maintained her composure, though inwardly she questioned the Duke's decision to leave her alone with a man who had already demonstrated his capacity for impropriety. His Grace has responsibilities that cannot be neglected, even for social obligations. "Responsibilities," Adrian echoed, his tone making the word sound faintly ridiculous. "Tell me, Eleanor, forgive me, Your Grace, how do you find married life thus far? Is Winter Hall everything you dreamed of during your reduced circumstances?" The barb was deliberate, designed to remind her of her family's disgrace and her own precipitous fall from social standing. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of witnessing her discomfort. "I find Winter Hall a dignified residence, and the Duke a considerate husband." Adrian's laugh held no warmth. "Considerate, what a deliciously chosen word, neither praise nor censure, yet implying virtuous restraint. Your diplomatic skills have flourished, it seems." "You mistake honest assessment for diplomacy, Sir Adrian." "Do I?" He leaned forward, dropping his voice to a near whisper. "Then perhaps you might honestly assess why a man of Winter's position would select a bride whose family name has been tarnished by financial impropriety, unless, of course, that tarnish makes you a more manageable duchess, less inclined to question, more grateful for rescue." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, anger overcoming her earlier determination to remain unaffected by his provocations. "You presume too much, sir. The Duke's reasons are his own, but I assure you I am neither so desperate nor so lacking in dignity as to accept such an arrangement as you imply. Desperation wears many masks, my dear, as does ambition, as does jealousy," she countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Adrian's expression hardened momentarily before dissolving into practiced charm once more. "Jealousy? How fascinating that you should interpret my concern for an old friend as something so base. I merely wish to ensure you haven't traded one form of bondage for another, albeit more gilded." "Your concern is noted and dismissed," Eleanor replied coldly. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have household matters to attend to." Rising with as much dignity as she could muster, Eleanor pulled the bell cord to summon a servant. Adrian stood as well, offering a bow that managed to be both perfect in execution and insolent in intent. "Of course. Far be it from me to interfere with your newfound duties." He glanced around the elegantly appointed room. "It's a beautiful cage, Eleanor. I hope it proves worth the price of admission." Before she could formulate a suitably cutting response, the door opened to admit not a servant, but Lady Augusta, whose keen gaze immediately assessed the tension between the two occupants. "Sir Adrian," she greeted him with cool politeness, "how unexpected to find you at Winter. I was not aware my brother had renewed acquaintance with the Crowell family." "Lady Augusta, as formidable as ever," Adrian replied, his smile never faltering. "I came merely to pay my respects to the new Duchess. Old county connections, you understand." "Indeed. How commendably neighbourly." Augusta's tone suggested she found it anything but. "I believe my brother has returned from his business. No doubt he will wish to bid you farewell before you depart." The dismissal was unmistakable. Adrian accepted it with superficial grace, though Eleanor did not miss the flash of resentment in his eyes. After his departure, escorted by Augusta, Eleanor sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted by the encounter. Augusta returned shortly, her expression concerned. "Are you well, my dear? You look quite pale." "Sir Adrian's conversation proved somewhat taxing," Eleanor admitted. "I can well imagine. That man always did possess a remarkable talent for unpleasantness disguised as civility." Augusta seated herself across from Eleanor. "May I inquire what brought him to Wintour? Edmund would not normally tolerate his presence. He claimed to be congratulating us on our marriage." "How thoughtful," Augusta remarked dryly. "And did these congratulations include subtle inquiries regarding the circumstances of said marriage?" Eleanor looked up, startled by the older woman's perception. "Indeed they did. Rather pointed ones, in fact. I suspected as much. Adrian Crowell has nursed ambitions above his station for years. Your marriage to Edmund must have come as quite a shock to his system." Augusta studied Eleanor with sympathetic understanding. "Did he upset you greatly?" "He implied impropriety in the Duke's choice of bride, that some secret arrangement or scandal must explain our match." Augusta's expression darkened. "The man's impertinence knows no bounds. I trust you did not allow his insinuations to distress you?" "I confess they have left me unsettled," Eleanor admitted, "not because I give them credence, but because others might. The Duke's choice of a bride without fortune or connections invites speculation." "My brother has never concerned himself with the opinions of society," Augusta replied, "though I admit his decision to marry at all came as a surprise after maintaining his widowhood for so many years." Eleanor hesitated, then asked the question that had preoccupied her thoughts since Adrian's departure. "Lady Augusta, may I ask, what became of the Duke's first wife? I know so little, yet the shadow of her absence seems to linger in every corner of this house." Augusta's expression grew somber. "Arabella died in childbirth along with the infant, a son. Edmund has never spoken of it directly, not even to me, but I believe he holds himself responsible in some fashion. How could he be at fault for such tragedy?" "Guilt seldom requires logical foundation," Augusta replied sadly, "particularly in a man as devoted to duty and control as my brother." Eleanor's fingers found the locket at her throat, turning it absently as she absorbed this new information. "And there were no other children?" "No. Their marriage lasted barely 2 years before—" Augusta trailed off, then continued with evident effort to brighten her tone. "But we must not dwell on past sorrows. You are Winter's future now, and perhaps its salvation from the melancholy that has gripped it these 7 years." Before Eleanor could respond to this startling declaration, the door opened to admit the Duke himself, still wearing his riding clothes, his expression unusually animated. "I see Crowell has finally taken his leave," he observed, glancing between the two women. "I apologize for subjecting you to his company, Eleanor. Had I known the true purpose of his visit, I would not have extended such courtesy." "You need not apologize," Eleanor replied. "I am capable of managing unwanted attentions." Something like approval flickered in the Duke's eyes. "Indeed. Augusta, might I have a moment alone with the Duchess?" Augusta rose with a knowing smile. "Of course. I shall see you both at dinner." She paused at the door, adding, "Eleanor handled herself admirably with Crowell, Edmund. You need have no concerns regarding her ability to maintain the dignity of Wintour." After her departure, the Duke approached, removing his riding gloves with methodical precision. "I must ask what Crowell said to you when I was not present. His parting remarks to me suggested impertinence beyond the bounds of acceptable conduct." Eleanor hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "He questioned the nature of our marriage, why you would choose a bride of diminished circumstances when more advantageous matches were available. And what response did you offer? That your reasons were your own, and not subject to his speculation." She met his gaze directly. "Though I admit I find myself equally curious." The Duke moved to the window, his back to her as he gazed out at the gardens now bathed in late afternoon light. For several moments he remained silent, and Eleanor feared he would once again evade her question. "My first marriage was arranged with attention to every possible advantage," he said finally, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "Bloodlines, connections, fortune, all impeccable. The result was a perfect union by every measure save one." He turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had yet witnessed. "Happiness. We had everything except that most essential element." Eleanor scarcely dared breathe, afraid any movement might shatter this unprecedented moment of openness. "When I determined to marry again, I resolved to select a bride based on different criteria." He hesitated, then continued with evident effort. "Your conduct during your family's difficulties revealed character of uncommon quality, dignity in adversity, loyalty despite cost. These are attributes beyond price. Stunned by this unexpected revelation, Eleanor struggled to reconcile his words with the cold formality that had characterized their interactions. I had no idea you had observed me with such attention. There is much you do not yet know about me, he replied, his composure returning like a shield being raised. Just as there is much I have yet to discover about you. He stepped closer, close enough that Eleanor could detect the scent of leather and horses that clung to his clothing, mingled with something more complex, sandalwood perhaps, and the faint, indefinable essence of his skin. I would like to show you something, he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone. If you would accompany me to the West Wing? Curiosity piqued. Eleanor nodded her assent. They walked together through corridors she had not yet explored, the Duke occasionally pointing out features of architectural interest or explaining the history behind a particular portrait or artifact. The West Wing appeared less frequently used, its grandeur slightly subdued by an air of disuse. At the end of a long gallery, the Duke paused before a double door of polished oak. This room has been closed for many years, he said, producing a key from his waistcoat pocket. I had it opened and prepared this morning. The doors swung inward to reveal a magnificent library, its walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. Tall windows admitted the golden light of late afternoon, illuminating comfortable chairs arranged before a massive fireplace. A piano occupied one corner, a globe stood in another. The air held the comforting scent of books and beeswax polish. My mother's library, the Duke explained. She spent much of her time here when I was a child. I thought, that is, Augusta mentioned you enjoy reading. Eleanor stepped into the room, overwhelmed by both its beauty and the gesture it represented. It's wonderful, she breathed, turning slowly to take in the surroundings. Truly, I have never seen its equal. It is yours now, the Duke said simply, to use as you wish. Eleanor faced him, searching his expression for the meaning behind this unexpected gift. Thank you, she said softly, for this and for the locket. I still do not understand how you came to possess it. Understanding will come with time, he replied. For now, it is enough that these things are restored to their rightful place. As they stood together in the warm light of the library, something shifted between them, subtle as the changing angle of sunlight through glass, yet no less transformative. Eleanor felt a tension she had not fully acknowledged begin to ease, replaced by a cautious curiosity about the complex man she had married. The clock in the hallway chimed 5, breaking the moment. I must change for dinner, the Duke said, resuming his more formal demeanor. I shall see you at 7. He departed with a slight bow, leaving Eleanor alone in the library, her library now. She moved slowly among the shelves, trailing her fingers along the spines of books that represented a lifetime of collected wisdom and beauty. On the mantelpiece stood a small porcelain figurine of a dancer, delicate and graceful in frozen motion. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened it to find a pressed white rose petal and a single line in the Duke's precise handwriting. Some gifts require no reason beyond themselves. A fortnight passed, each day establishing new rhythms within the formal structure of life at Wintour Hall. Eleanor found herself gradually assuming the responsibilities of her position, reviewing household accounts with Mrs. Winters, consulting with cook regarding menus, and making acquaintance with the Wintour tenants during carefully orchestrated visits to the estate's farms and cottages. The Duke maintained his reserve, yet small changes in his behavior suggested a thawing of his rigidity. He joined Eleanor in the library most evenings after dinner, sometimes reading silently in her company, occasionally engaging in conversation about books or music or the day's events. These interactions, though still marked by formality, grew incrementally more natural with each passing day. The library had become Eleanor's sanctuary, a space where she felt neither an intruder nor merely a titled administrator of the Duke's household. Here, surrounded by books and graced with afternoon light, she could almost imagine herself content with the strange arrangement that had become her marriage. It was in this sanctuary that Lady Augusta found her on the afternoon of the village fete, an annual tradition that Eleanor, as the new Duchess, would be expected to attend at the Duke's side. "Ah, here you are," Augusta declared, sweeping into the room in a rustle of lavender silk. "Contemplating your official debut as Duchess of Winter, I presume. The village will be positively aquiver with curiosity." Eleanor looked up from her book with a smile. Augusta's forthright manner had become a welcome constant in her new life. I confess I am somewhat apprehensive. The tenants have been polite during our visits, but a public appearance is rather different. You'll manage admirably, Augusta assured her, settling into the chair opposite. Simply stand regally beside Edmund, smile graciously, and avoid excessive conversation with the vicar's wife. She's a terrible gossip, with an inexhaustible supply of ailments to describe in excruciating detail. Eleanor laughed, grateful for the advice and the lightness with which it was delivered. I shall consider myself warned. Augusta's expression grew more serious. There is, however, another matter about which I feel compelled to warn you. I've received intelligence that Sir Adrian Crowle intends to attend the fete. Eleanor's smile faded. Surely he would not create a scene at a public gathering. Not openly, perhaps, but Adrian possesses a remarkable talent for sowing discord through seemingly innocent remarks. Augusta leaned forward, her voice lowering despite their privacy. I believe he nurses some particular grievance regarding your marriage to Edmund. He made his disapproval quite clear during his visit, Eleanor acknowledged, though I cannot fathom why my marriage should concern him so deeply. Augusta's shrewd gaze assessed Eleanor carefully. Can you not? Adrian courted you before your father's passing, did he not? Briefly, Eleanor conceded, though his attention cooled considerably once my circumstances changed. And yet he returns now, full of insinuation and veiled hostility. Augusta shook her head. Men's pride is a curious thing, particularly when wounded. I suspect he views your elevation to Duchess as a personal affront, a prize that should have been within his grasp had he possessed the courage to pursue you despite your reduced circumstances. Eleanor considered this perspective, finding it disturbingly plausible. I had not thought of it in those terms. Few of us examine the wounds we inadvertently inflict on others' vanity, Augusta replied. But be wary of Adrian. Wounded pride makes men dangerous, particularly those who present a charming facade. The conversation lingered in Eleanor's thoughts as she dressed for the fete, with Alice attending to the final adjustments of her gown, a creation of pale blue silk that Augusta had insisted befitted her first public appearance as Duchess. You look beautiful, Your Grace, Alice said, securing the last pin in Eleanor's carefully arranged hair. The whole village will be ever so impressed. Eleanor smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. Thank you, Alice, though I suspect their standards may be somewhat less exacting than those of London society. Begging your pardon, but I don't think that matters, Alice replied with unexpected wisdom. It's how you carry yourself, isn't it? The old Duchess, that is her Grace before you, she always looked proper grand, even when she was just walking in the gardens. Eleanor paused in the act of fastening her mother's locket around her throat. You remember the first Duchess? Alice nodded, her young face solemn. I was just a kitchen maid then, but I remember. She was very beautiful and kind too, though sad-like, especially toward the end. Sad? Eleanor prompted gently. Yes'm. She used to walk in the rose garden all alone, even when it was raining sometimes. Alice hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. There was talk among the older servants. Not that I listened proper, you understand, but they said she and his Grace had grown distant. Eleanor absorbed this information thoughtfully. Thank you for telling me, Alice. It helps me understand this household better. A knock at the door announced the Duke's arrival to escort her to the waiting carriage. He entered at her acknowledgement, immaculate in formal attire, his tall figure commanding even in the simple act of standing at her threshold. You look, he began, then paused, something flickering in his eyes as he regarded her, most suitable for the occasion. Eleanor rose, acutely aware of his scrutiny. Thank you, Your Grace. I have endeavoured to present myself appropriately as your Duchess. The formality of her response seemed to disappoint him, though his expression revealed little. Indeed, the carriage awaits. The journey to the village passed largely in silence, though Eleanor was conscious of the Duke's gaze occasionally resting upon her. Augusta accompanied them, filling the silence with commentary on the history of the fete and entertaining anecdotes from previous years. The village green presented a charming spectacle as they arrived. Colourful bunting stretched between trees, stalls displaying local crafts and produce, children running with ribbons, and musicians preparing their instruments upon a small wooden platform. The carriage's approach caused an immediate stir, conversations halting as the villagers turned to observe their Duke and his new bride. Remember to smile, Augusta murmured, as a footman assisted Eleanor from the carriage. You look as though you're approaching an execution rather than a celebration. Eleanor managed a genuine laugh at this, which providentially coincided with her first steps onto the green, presenting the assembled villagers with the pleasing sight of their Duchess smiling warmly, as she took the Duke's proffered arm. What followed was a carefully choreographed procession around the fete, with the Duke introducing Eleanor to prominent villagers and tenant farmers. She found herself relaxing as the afternoon progressed, genuinely interested in the lives and concerns of the people who lived under Wintour's protection and authority. "You have a natural gift for this," the Duke observed quietly as they paused between introductions. "The tenants are responding well to your interest." Surprised by the compliment, Eleanor glanced up at him. "I find their lives and work fascinating. Mr. Hadley's description of the new drainage system was particularly enlightening." A ghost of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "I doubt any previous Duchess of Winter has ever found drainage enlightening." "Then they missed an opportunity for valuable education," Eleanor replied, emboldened by his almost smile. He regarded her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "You continue to surprise me, Eleanor." Before she could respond, they were approached by the vicar and his wife, the latter launching immediately into a detailed account of her rheumatism, just as Augusta had warned. Eleanor maintained a polite expression of concern, though she caught the Duke's eye briefly during a particularly graphic description of swollen joints. The shared moment of suppressed amusement felt strangely intimate, a private understanding in the midst of public performance. The pleasant atmosphere was disrupted, however, by the arrival of Sir Adrian Crowell, elegantly attired and bearing the confident smile of a man certain of his welcome despite evidence to the contrary. "Your Grace," he greeted the Duke with a bow just short of insolent in its flourish. "How democratic of you to mingle with your tenantry." And Duchess, a vision of aristocratic loveliness among the rustics. The Duke's posture stiffened perceptibly. "Crowell, I was not aware you had interests in this parish." "My interests are varied and wide-ranging," Adrian replied, his gaze lingering on Eleanor, "particularly where beauty and elevation are concerned." "Then I suggest you elevate yourself elsewhere," the Duke responded, his tone glacial. "My wife and I have obligations to our tenants." Adrian's smile remained fixed, though his eyes hardened. "Of course, far be it from me to interfere with your obligations." He turned to Eleanor, executing another flourishing bow. "Duchess, might I beg the favor of your company for a brief promenade about the green? There are matters of mutual acquaintance I would discuss." Before Eleanor could formulate a diplomatic refusal, the Duke intervened. "The Duchess remains at my side, Crowell. Any matters you wish to discuss can be addressed through proper channels." Adrian's expression tightened momentarily before smoothing into practiced affability. "How very protective you've become, Winter. One might almost suspect jealousy, an emotion I had thought entirely foreign to your nature." An uncomfortable silence fell as the two men regarded each other with barely concealed hostility. Eleanor, sensing the potential for public spectacle, placed her hand deliberately on the Duke's arm. "I believe the children are preparing to present their maypole dance, Your Grace," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We would not wish to miss their performance, having promised our attention." The Duke covered her hand with his own, a gesture that sent an unexpected warmth through Eleanor's body. "Indeed. Good day, Crowell." As they moved away, Eleanor was acutely conscious of Adrian's gaze following them, and of the Duke's hand still covering hers, warm and unexpectedly comforting. "Thank you," he said quietly when they were beyond Adrian's hearing. "Your intervention was timely. I had no desire to witness a confrontation between my husband and a former acquaintance," Eleanor replied, "particularly not before an audience of tenants." "Former acquaintance?" The Duke's tone held a question. Eleanor hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal of her prior connection to Adrian. "Sir Adrian was briefly among my suitors before my father's death," she admitted. "His interest diminished considerably once our financial circumstances changed." The Duke's expression darkened. "Yet he now presumes upon that prior connection to create discomfort. I believe Augusta may be right. His pride was wounded by my marriage to you, a prize beyond his reach, yet one he had discarded." "You are not a prize to be claimed or discarded," the Duke replied with unexpected vehemence. "You are the Duchess of Wintour." The assertion held a possessiveness that both startled and pleased Eleanor. "Yes," she agreed softly, "I am." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of several children bearing flower garlands, which they presented to Eleanor with shy pride. The formality of the afternoon dissolved into genuine warmth as she accepted their offerings and listened to their carefully rehearsed speeches of welcome. Later, as the sun began its descent toward evening, Eleanor found herself momentarily separated from the Duke as he conferred with the estate steward about some matter requiring immediate attention. She stood at the edge of the green, watching the villagers dance to the lively music of fiddle and accordion. "Such a charming spectacle," came Adrian's voice from behind her. "The simple pleasures of simple folk. So very different from the entertainments you once enjoyed in more elevated circles." Eleanor turned, maintaining a composed expression despite her displeasure at his persistence. The sincerity of their enjoyment seems preferable to the artifice of certain society amusements. How nobly expressed! The Duchess adapts to her new role with admirable flexibility. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I wonder if your husband appreciates the extent of your adaptability." "I suggest you consider your words with care, Sir Adrian," Eleanor warned, her tone glacial despite the heat rising to her cheeks. "My husband does not tolerate disrespect toward me, nor do I." "Disrespect? I merely observe that your circumstances have undergone a remarkable transformation. From near destitution to duchess in one convenient ceremony." His smile held no warmth. "One cannot help but wonder what arrangement secured such advancement." Eleanor felt a cold fury replace her earlier discomfort. "The only arrangement, Sir Adrian, was a marriage conducted with full legal and religious sanction. Any insinuation to the contrary reflects more upon your character than mine." "Such righteous indignation," he murmured. "Yet I cannot help but recall your family's disgrace, your father's debts, the whispers of impropriety in his financial dealings. How convenient that all should be forgotten in the glow of your new title." "Nothing is forgotten," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the painful accuracy of his barbs. "Least of all the fair-weather nature of certain friendships that withered at the first hint of adversity." Adrian's expression hardened. "You mistake prudence for fickleness, my dear. A man in my position must consider connections carefully, as must a woman in mine," Eleanor countered, "which is why I would ask you to maintain a proper distance in future, both physically and in conversation." "Such haughtiness from one so recently humbled," Adrian remarked, his tone sharpening. "I wonder if your husband knows the full extent of your family's disgrace, the rumors that circulated regarding your father's methods of securing investments." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "My father was guilty of poor judgment, not dishonesty. A fine distinction, particularly when those who trusted him lost everything." Adrian's smile returned, cruel in its satisfaction at her visible distress. Perhaps the Duke would find such details illuminating. "What details would those be, Crowell?" The Duke's voice, cold and precise, came from directly behind Adrian, who turned with poorly concealed alarm. "Wintour, merely reminiscing about county matters with your charming bride." "Indeed." The Duke moved to Eleanor's side, his tall figure radiating controlled fury. "I find it curious that these reminiscences appear to cause my wife distress." Adrian maintained his facade of innocence. "If the Duchess finds discussion of her family history distressing, I can only offer my sincerest apologies." "You can offer your immediate departure," the Duke replied, his voice dropping to a register that, while quiet, carried unmistakable menace. "And you can consider your welcome at Winter Hall and its dependencies permanently withdrawn." Adrian's composure finally cracked, revealing the spite beneath his polished exterior. "How gallantly you defend her, Wintour. One might almost believe genuine feeling motivated your surprising choice of bride, rather than the convenient acquisition of a grateful and biddable woman, bound to you by financial salvation." Eleanor gasped at the naked insult, but before she could respond, the Duke stepped forward, his expression terrifying in its controlled rage. "You forget yourself, Crowell," he said, each word precise as a blade. "Leave now, while you retain the ability to do so under your own power." For a moment, it seemed Adrian might offer further provocation, but self-preservation evidently overcame his wounded pride. With a stiff bow, he turned and departed, his rigid back betraying his fury at the public dismissal. In the silence that followed, Eleanor became aware that several nearby villagers had witnessed the exchange, though the Duke's voice had been too low for his words to carry beyond their immediate circle. "Are you unwell?" the Duke asked, his gaze searching her face with unexpected concern. "You are pale." "I am quite well," Eleanor replied, though in truth she felt shaken by Adrian's vicious insinuations. "Merely surprised by Sir Adrian's persistence." "He will not trouble you again," the Duke stated with grim certainty. "I shall see to it personally." The possessive protection in his voice stirred something within Eleanor, a warmth that spread through her chest, despite the autumn chill that had descended with the setting sun. "Thank you," she said simply. The Duke offered his arm, which she took with genuine gratitude. As they rejoined the festivities, Eleanor was conscious of curious glances from the villagers who had clearly noted the confrontation with Sir Adrian. "They will talk," she murmured, nodding toward a cluster of women whose conversation had suspiciously ceased upon their approach. "Let them," the Duke replied. "Wintour has weathered worse storms than village gossip." As the fete concluded and they prepared to depart, the village children presented Eleanor with a crown of autumn flowers, which she accepted with genuine pleasure. The simple gesture of acceptance seemed to delight both the children and the assembled villagers, whose farewell cheers held a warmth that surprised her. During the carriage ride home, Augusta regaled them with observations and gentle mockery of various village personalities, her cheerful commentary filling the silence that might otherwise have grown awkward in the aftermath of Adrian's confrontation. Upon their return to Winter Hall, the Duke escorted Eleanor to the library rather than directly to the drawing room, where Augusta tactfully preceded them, claiming a desire for tea. In the private warmth of the library, lit by the soft glow of lamps against the gathering dusk, the Duke turned to Eleanor with an expression of unusual openness. "I must apologize for Crowell's behavior," he began. "Had I anticipated his attendance at the fete, I would have taken measures to prevent his approach." "You cannot be held responsible for his actions," Eleanor replied, removing her gloves and placing them carefully upon a side table. "Though I am grateful for your intervention." The Duke studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "His insinuations about your father, they distressed you greatly." It was not quite a question, yet Eleanor felt compelled to answer. "My father made grievous errors in judgment that cost many people dearly, including our family, but he was not, that is, he never intentionally," she faltered, finding it suddenly difficult to defend actions that had resulted in such widespread pain. "I am well acquainted with the particulars of your father's financial difficulties," the Duke said quietly, "including the circumstances that led to them. He was not dishonest, merely unwise in his trust of those who presented themselves as friends." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "You investigated my family's affairs?" "Thoroughly," he admitted without apology, "before approaching your aunt with my proposal. I wished to understand precisely what had occurred." A chill ran through Eleanor at this revelation. "To ensure I was not tainted by scandal beyond repair. To ensure that you had been victim rather than accomplice," he corrected. "And to identify those truly responsible for your father's ruin." Eleanor's breath caught. "Truly responsible? I don't understand." The Duke moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames for a long moment before responding. "Your father's investment in the Northern Railway venture was based on falsified reports of its viability, reports prepared by men who knew the enterprise would fail, but who stood to profit from its initial capitalization." "How could you possibly know this?" "Because I acquired the company's records during liquidation," he replied simply, "along with certain private correspondence that confirmed deliberate deception." Eleanor sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by this revelation. "Why would you investigate so thoroughly? What possible interest could my family's disgrace hold for you?" The Duke turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had yet witnessed. "Because I wished to know if you were worthy of the title I proposed to bestow upon you, not by birth or fortune, which are accidents of circumstance, but by character, which is revealed most clearly in adversity." He approached, stopping before her chair and extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor placed her ungloved hand in his. The Duke's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "What I discovered," he continued, his voice low and intent, "was a woman who maintained dignity without pride, who sacrificed comfort without complaint, who honored obligations not her own making. In short, a woman worthy of becoming Duchess of Winter, in more than name alone." Eleanor's heart thundered in her chest as she gazed up at him, searching his face for any sign of calculation or deception. She found only earnest intensity and something else, something that made the breath catch in her throat. "And have you found me so in practice as well as in theory?" she asked softly. "I have found you," he began, then paused, seemingly struggling with unfamiliar territory, more than I anticipated. He released her hand slowly, his fingertips trailing across her palm, in a gesture so intimate it sent a shiver through her entire body. "We should join Augusta for dinner," he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone, though something new lingered beneath the surface. "But this conversation is not concluded, Eleanor. There is more you should know." As they walked together toward the drawing room, Eleanor was conscious of a profound shift in their relationship, as if a door had been opened between them, offering glimpses of rooms previously sealed and silent. Behind them in the library, the autumn flowers of her village crown lay forgotten upon the table, their petals beginning to curl at the edges as if in anticipation of transformation yet to come. Dinner that evening passed in a haze of distraction for Eleanor. She responded to Augusta's cheerful conversation by rote, her thoughts consumed by the Duke's revelations in the library. What more could he possibly have to tell her, and what significance should she attach to that lingering touch, so brief, yet so charged with unspoken meaning? The Duke himself seemed similarly preoccupied, his contributions to the dinner conversation more perfunctory than usual. Several times, Eleanor glanced up to find his gaze upon her, thoughtful and intent, before he would return his attention to his plate or respond to some query from Augusta. "I declare you are both positively somnambulant this evening," Augusta finally observed with characteristic directness. "Has the excitement of the village fete so exhausted your conversational resources? Or perhaps it was the unexpected appearance of our least favorite baronet that has cast this pall?" "Forgive me, Augusta," Eleanor replied, making an effort to engage. "I confess my thoughts were wandering, as were my brother's, evidently, though I suspect in rather more aligned directions than is typically the case." Augusta's shrewd gaze moved between them, a knowing smile playing about her lips. "Perhaps I shall retire early this evening. A slight headache, you understand. Nothing that should prevent you both from continuing your evening in the library, as has become your custom." The Duke gave his sister a look that, in another man, might have been interpreted as alarm. "There is no need to withdraw on our account, Augusta." "Nonsense. I shall be far better company tomorrow after a restful night." Augusta rose, prompting both Eleanor and the Duke to stand as well. "Eleanor, my dear, that shade of rose becomes you tremendously. Does it not, Edmund?" Put on the spot by this direct query about his wife's appearance, the Duke appeared momentarily discomfited. "It is most suitable," he managed, though his gaze lingered on Eleanor's face in a manner that suggested more appreciation than his tepid words conveyed. After Augusta's departure, an awkward silence descended upon the dining room. The footman stood at attention, awaiting instructions for serving the final course or clearing the table. "Shall we adjourn to the library?" the Duke suggested. "Unless you prefer to retire as well." "The library would be pleasant," Eleanor replied, her pulse quickening at the prospect of continuing their interrupted conversation. The walk through the corridors of Winter Hall seemed longer than usual, the silence between them charged with anticipation. A footman preceded them to light the library lamps, then withdrew with a discreet bow, closing the doors behind him. Alone, at last, Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens now silvered by moonlight. She heard the Duke cross to the sideboard, where a decanter of brandy stood ready, the soft clink of glass against glass as he poured himself a measure. "May I offer you a glass of sherry?" he inquired, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you, no." Eleanor turned to face him, gathering her courage. "You mentioned there was more I should know." The Duke set down his untouched brandy, his expression grave as he approached her. "Indeed, though I find myself uncharacteristically uncertain how to proceed. Perhaps directly would be best," Eleanor suggested, her hands clasped tightly together to prevent their trembling from betraying her tension. "Very well." He drew a deep breath as if preparing for a difficult confession. "You are aware that I investigated your family's circumstances before proposing our marriage. What you do not know is why I undertook such an investigation in the first place." Eleanor waited, sensing this was a moment of significant revelation. "I first observed you 3 years ago at Lady Harrington's musical evening. You were playing the pianoforte, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Your performance was moving." Surprised by this unexpected beginning, Eleanor searched her memory. "I recall the evening, though I do not remember seeing you there. I arrived late and stood at the back of the room. You were wholly absorbed in the music." A faint smile touched his lips. "I found myself equally absorbed in watching you play. And from this single observation, you developed an interest in my family's financial affairs?" Eleanor asked, confusion evident in her tone. "No. From this single observation, I developed an interest in you." The Duke's directness startled them both. He turned away briefly, as if collecting himself, then continued. "I made inquiries about you, discreet ones. I learned of your family's respectable, if modest, position, your reputation for kindness and intelligence, your father's ill health. You investigated me years before my father's death." Eleanor struggled to comprehend the timeline he was describing. "I observed you from a distance on several occasions thereafter, at the county assembly, in the village lending library, at church services when I was in residence at Windsor." He hesitated, then added, "I had no intention of acting upon my interest. My experience of marriage had left me reluctant to enter that state again." Eleanor's mind reeled with this revelation. "Then, what changed your mind?" "Your father's death, the subsequent revelation of his financial ruin." The Duke's expression grew somber. "I witnessed your conduct during that period of adversity, your dignity, your care for your younger sister, your refusal of easier paths that might have compromised your principles." "You witnessed this all from a distance?" Eleanor asked, a note of disbelief entering her voice. "Not entirely. I employed inquiries through mutual acquaintances, reports from my steward, who had occasion to observe your management of what remained of Whitcomb Park." He met her gaze directly. "I did not make my decision lightly, Eleanor, nor in ignorance." "Your decision to marry me," she clarified, still struggling to absorb the full import of his confession. "Yes, to offer you the protection of my name and position, without expectation of, that is." For the first time since she had known him, the Duke appeared genuinely discomfited. "I wished to provide you security without imposing upon you the more intimate obligations of marriage." Understanding dawned, bringing with it a flush of heat to Eleanor's cheeks. "You proposed a marriage of convenience." "I proposed a marriage of respect," he corrected quietly, "based upon my admiration for your character rather than conventional considerations of alliance or advantage." Eleanor moved away from the window, needing physical distance to process this extraordinary revelation. "And the locket? How did that come into your possession?" "I traced it through the dealer who purchased it from your aunt. It took some time to locate, as it had changed hands several times." He paused, then added with careful precision, "I acquired it shortly before our wedding, intending it as evidence of my intentions toward you." "Evidence?" Eleanor echoed, puzzled by his choice of word. "That I wished to restore rather than possess, to give rather than take." The Duke's gaze was steady, though his voice had grown less certain. "I have not been, that is, my first marriage was not," he faltered, seemingly unable to complete the thought. Eleanor waited, sensing that whatever he struggled to express was vital to understanding the man she had married. "My first wife was beautiful, accomplished and utterly suitable in every respect," he finally continued. "Our families arranged the match with meticulous attention to advantage on both sides. Neither of us objected. It was what was expected." Eleanor recalled Augusta's words about the first Duchess, and yet she was unhappy. "We both were." The admission seemed to cost him something in pride. "Two strangers bound by law and duty, with no language between us save that of obligation. When she died," his voice dropped almost to a whisper, "I resolved never again to enter such an arrangement." "Yet, here we are," Eleanor observed, her tone gentle despite her confusion. "Yes, here we are." He moved closer, close enough that she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood that she had come to associate with him. "But on different terms, or so I had intended." "Different how?" "I meant to offer you independence within our marriage, the security of my name and fortune without the constraints of conventional marital expectations." He hesitated, then added with evident difficulty, "I did not wish you to feel obligated in ways that might diminish your spirit." Eleanor felt a strange mixture of emotions at this confession, gratitude for his consideration, confusion at his methods, and something else, something that felt curiously like disappointment. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. "Have your intentions changed?" The Duke studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I find myself less certain of the wisdom of my original plan." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor became acutely aware of her heartbeat, of the rise and fall of her chest beneath the rose-colored silk of her gown, of the Duke's, Edmund's, proximity, and the unusual vulnerability in his expression. "Why did you give me the rose?" she asked suddenly, the question emerging unbidden. The unexpectedness of her query seemed to startle him. "It was my mother's favorite variety. She cultivated it herself in the conservatory." He paused, then added softly, "It reminded me of you, delicate in appearance but remarkably resilient." The simple honesty of his response touched something deep within Eleanor. Without conscious decision, she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against the back of his hand. "Thank you," she said, "not just for the rose or the locket or this library, but for seeing me when others looked away, for valuing what remained when everything else was lost." Edmund's hand turned beneath hers, his fingers entwining with her own. The gesture, so simple yet so profound, seemed to bridge the careful distance they had maintained since their wedding. "Eleanor," he began, his voice holding a warmth she had not heard before. The library door swung open abruptly, admitting a flustered-looking footman. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but there is an urgent situation requiring your attention." Edmund released Eleanor's hand reluctantly, his expression closing once more into the mask of ducal authority. "What has occurred?" "Fire at the Northfield tenant cottage, Your Grace. The steward reports it spreading rapidly toward the barns. Have the horses saddled immediately. Alert Dr. Everin if there are injuries." The Duke turned to Eleanor, his manner once more formal, though his eyes held regret. "I must go. Do not wait up. This may take some hours to resolve." "Of course," she replied, fighting disappointment at the untimely interruption. "Please be careful." He hesitated, as if wishing to say more, then bowed briefly and strode from the room, issuing further instructions to the waiting footman. Left alone in the library, Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind awhirl with the evening's revelations. The Duke, Edmund, had been watching her, admiring her from afar for years before their marriage. He had investigated her family's disgrace not to confirm her suitability, but to understand her struggles. He had proposed marriage not as a business arrangement, but as an act of, what? Protection? Admiration? Or could it possibly have been something more profound? She touched her hand where his fingers had entwined with hers, the memory of that simple contact sending warmth through her body. Something was changing between them, something unexpected and potentially wonderful. Outside the library window, clouds obscured the moon, plunging the gardens into temporary darkness. In the distance, a faint orange glow illuminated the horizon, marking the location of the fire that had called Edmund away. Eleanor rose, moving to the window to watch the distant flames, her heart filled with concern for both the affected tenants and for her husband, riding now toward danger without hesitation. "Be safe," she whispered into the darkness, her breath fogging the glass. "Come back to me." The unexpected possessiveness of that final thought startled her. When had Winter Hall become home? When had its master become someone she feared to lose? The clock in the hallway struck 10, its sonorous tones echoing through the empty corridors of Winter Hall. Eleanor remained at the window, her gaze fixed on the distant glow of fire, watching and waiting for her husband's return. Dawn broke in shades of pearl and gold over Winter Hall, the tranquil beauty at odds with the tension that had permeated the household throughout the night. Eleanor, who had eventually retired to her chambers, but found sleep elusive, stood at her window watching as riders approached through the morning mist, the Duke at their head, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "They're returned, Your Grace," Alice announced, entering with fresh water for the washing stand. "The fire's out from what the kitchen's heard, though the Nortons' cottage is gone entirely." "Were there injuries?" Eleanor inquired, already reaching for her dressing gown. "Burns to Mr. Norton's hands, they say, from trying to save his tools, and the Duke's steward took a blow from falling timber." Alice poured the steaming water with careful precision, but all alive, thank the Lord. Eleanor dressed quickly, selecting a practical gown of lavender muslin rather than awaiting Alice's assistance with more formal attire. She twisted her hair into a simple knot, secured it with pins, and made her way downstairs just as the Duke entered the front hall. His appearance shocked her. Soot blackened his face and clothing. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled and singed in places. Fatigue lined his features, yet he continued issuing instructions to the butler regarding accommodations for the displaced tenant family. "Edmund," she called, momentarily forgetting formality in her concern. He turned, surprise registering in his expression at her informal address. "Eleanor, I had not expected you to be awake at this hour." "I could hardly sleep with such drama unfolding," she replied, approaching him with careful dignity despite her impulse to reach out, to touch his face, to assure herself he was truly unharmed. "You must be exhausted. There is much still to be done," he said, though weariness evident in his voice belied his words. "The Nortons have lost everything, their home, their possessions, their winter stores. Then we must see to their immediate comfort, while plans for rebuilding commence," Eleanor stated with quiet authority. "I shall speak with Mrs. Winters about preparing the old gamekeeper's cottage for their temporary use." The Duke regarded her with something like wonder. "You would take this responsibility upon yourself? It is my duty as your Duchess, is it not?" She met his gaze steadily. "To care for those under Winter's protection." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken recognition. "Yes," he finally replied, "though many in your position might consider such matters beneath their attention." Then they would be poor duchesses indeed. Eleanor glanced at his soot-stained clothing. You should rest while I make the necessary arrangements. You can be of little use to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. A fleeting smile touched his lips. Is that an order, Your Grace? A recommendation born of concern, she corrected, surprised by his momentary playfulness despite his obvious fatigue, though I shall elevate it to a duchess's command if necessary. Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Everin, a man of medium height with kind eyes and capable hands, whom Eleanor recognized from the village fete. He carried a medical bag and wore an expression of brisk efficiency. Winter, you should be abed, not standing about issuing orders in your condition, he declared without preamble. I've just left Norton with his hands bandaged and sedated. Williams's shoulder is set, though he'll need weeks to recover properly. What remains is work for the uninjured, not men who've spent the night inhaling smoke and hauling timber. The Duke's expression suggested he might argue the point, but a glance at Eleanor's concerned face appeared to change his mind. Very well. I shall rest for a few hours, provided the Duchess agrees to oversee the arrangements for the Norton family. I am perfectly capable of doing so, Eleanor assured him. Dr. Everin, would you be kind enough to advise me on any special requirements for Mr. Norton's comfort? I intend to establish the family in the old gamekeeper's cottage until their home can be rebuilt. The doctor's approval was evident in his smile. A sensible plan, Your Grace. The main concern will be keeping his burns clean and preventing fever. I shall call upon them once they're settled and provide instructions for his care. Thank you. Eleanor turned back to the Duke, who was watching their exchange with an unreadable expression. I shall report to you once arrangements are complete. Please allow Winters to attend to you. You look as though you've stood too close to the flames yourself. Something flickered in his eyes at her words. A brief vulnerability quickly concealed. I shall be in my chambers if truly urgent matters arise. Otherwise, I entrust the situation to your judgment. The gravity of this delegation was not lost on Eleanor. As the Duke departed, leaning more heavily on the banister than he might have wished observed, Dr. Everin turned to her with frank assessment. He must think highly of you, Your Grace. I've known Edmund Hale since boyhood, and he's never been one to relinquish control willingly, even when half dead from exhaustion. You've been friends that long? Eleanor inquired, seeing an opportunity to gain insight into her enigmatic husband. Since we were boys climbing trees and fishing in the stream that borders both our father's properties. The doctor smiled at the memory. Though our paths diverged when he inherited the dukedom and I pursued medicine, I like to think some essence of friendship remains. It clearly does, given the liberty with which you address him, Eleanor observed with a smile of her own. A physician's privilege, Everin replied with a wink. Even dukes become mere mortals in the sick room. But come, if we're to have the Nortons comfortably settled by nightfall, there's much to arrange. The morning passed in a flurry of activity, as Eleanor directed servants in preparing the gamekeeper's cottage, dispatched wagons with provisions and necessities, and consulted with the steward regarding plans for rebuilding the destroyed tenant home. She found unexpected satisfaction in these practical tasks, applying the household management skills she had developed during Whitcomb Park's decline to a more constructive purpose. By mid-afternoon, the Norton family, husband, wife, and 3 young children, were installed in their temporary home with provisions, clothing, and essential furnishings. Mrs. Norton, a sturdy woman with a practical manner belied by red-rimmed eyes, grasped Eleanor's hands in gratitude. We never thought to see the Duchess herself attending to our troubles, she said, her voice rough with emotion. The old Duke would have helped, to be sure, but through stewards and such, not with his own hands. Winter Hall's duty to its tenants does not change with its mistress, Eleanor replied gently. Your husband's injury occurred in service to the estate, protecting property that ultimately belongs to the Duke. Our obligation to you is clear. Still, it's a comfort to know the Hall has a heart again, Mrs. Norton persisted, begging your Grace's pardon for the liberty. The remark stayed with Eleanor as she returned to Winter Hall, contemplating what the woman had meant by a heart again. Had the estate seemed heartless during the years of the Duke's widowhood? Had his grief manifested as coldness toward those dependent upon him? She found Augusta in the drawing room, unusually subdued as she arranged autumn flowers in a crystal vase. I've heard about your management of the Norton situation, Augusta said without preamble. Most impressive for a duchess of less than a month's standing. It seemed the proper course, Eleanor replied, accepting the cup of tea Augusta poured for her. Has the Duke emerged from his chambers? Not yet, though Winters reports he bathed and slept for several hours. Knowing my brother, He is probably reviewing estate documents even now instead of properly resting. Augusta studied Eleanor over the rim of her teacup. You seem to have formed a remarkably efficient partnership in a short time. Hardly that, Eleanor demurred. I merely applied common sense to an urgent situation. Common sense is uncommonly rare, particularly among those born to privilege. Augusta set down her cup with deliberate precision. My brother recognized that quality in you, I think, long before he made his offer. Eleanor glanced up sharply. Has he spoken to you of this? Edmund? Hardly. He guards his inner thoughts as a miser guards gold. Augusta's shrewd gaze assessed Eleanor carefully. But I observed his interest in you years ago, though he believed himself entirely discreet. You knew he was watching me? Eleanor struggled to find an appropriate term for the Duke's distant observations. Watching, inquiring, collecting every scrap of information about the quiet, dignified daughter of Whitcomb Park. Augusta smiled at Eleanor's evident surprise. My brother may be a master of self-containment, but to one who knows him well, his behavior was most revealing. Why did you not mention this before? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought it a kind fiction designed to ease your transition into an arranged marriage? Augusta's expression grew more serious. Besides, it was Edmund's story to tell, not mine. I merely confirm it now because I believe he has finally found the courage to share it with you himself. Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened to admit the Duke himself. Though still bearing evidence of his ordeal in the slight redness around his eyes and a certain stiffness in his movements, he had restored himself to his usual immaculate appearance. Augusta, Eleanor. He acknowledged them both with a nod. I trust the Norton family is suitably established. Yes, in the old gamekeeper's cottage, Eleanor confirmed, rising from her seat. Dr. Everin has visited them again and reports Mr. Norton's hand should heal well if infection is prevented. The children are settled, and provisions have been arranged for at least a fortnight. Excellent. His gaze lingered on her face, a warmth in his expression that had been rare before their interrupted conversation in the library. I am in your debt for managing the situation so capably. Augusta set her teacup down with a distinct clink. Well, I believe I shall visit Lady Pembroke this afternoon. She has been quite insistent that I view her new conservatory. She rose, gathering her shawl with deliberate nonchalance. I may be quite late returning, so do not wait dinner on my account. After her departure, an expectant silence filled the drawing room. Eleanor remained standing, suddenly unsure of her position or how to continue the conversation so dramatically interrupted the previous evening. I have been thinking, the Duke began, moving to stand before the fireplace, about our discussion in the library. As have I, Eleanor admitted. I realize I left much unresolved when duty called me away. He turned to face her directly. I would remedy that now, if you are willing. Eleanor nodded, her pulse quickening at the intensity of his gaze. I believe we were discussing your original intentions regarding our marriage. Indeed. He hesitated, then continued with evident effort toward candor. I proposed our union with certain boundaries in mind. Boundaries I believed would preserve your dignity and independence while securing your position in society. A marriage in name only, Eleanor clarified, wanting absolute clarity on this point. Initially, yes, I thought it the most respectful approach, given the circumstances. His expression grew uncertain, a vulnerability she would never have imagined possible in the cold, controlled Duke she had first married. But I find those boundaries increasingly difficult to maintain. Eleanor's breath caught at this admission. Why is that, Your Grace? Edmund, he corrected gently. When we are private, at least, I would hear my name from your lips. Edmund, she repeated, the simple use of his given name somehow more intimate than any physical contact could have been. He moved closer, close enough that she could detect the sandalwood scent of his shaving soap, the fresh linen of his shirt, the warmth radiating from his body. I find myself, he began, then paused, searching for words. That is, my feelings have developed beyond my original intentions. You have shown yourself to be not merely the woman of character I observed from afar, but a partner of unexpected strength and compassion. Eleanor felt warmth rising to her cheeks at his praise. I have only done what seemed right, and therein lies the remarkable nature of your character. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face before dropping back to his side, as if uncertain of his welcome. I find myself wanting more than the arrangement I initially proposed. I find myself wanting— He faltered, and Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that this powerful man, this Duke who commanded thousands of acres and hundreds of lives, was afraid of rejection, afraid of vulnerability, afraid of the very feelings he was attempting to express. With courage born of this understanding, Eleanor closed the distance between them, placing her hand gently upon his arm. "What do you want, Edmund?" His gaze met hers, naked emotion visible in his eyes, for perhaps the first time since their marriage. A true marriage, Eleanor, not merely in name or law or public appearance, but in private truth. A partnership of minds and— He hesitated, then finished with quiet intensity, "and hearts, if such might be possible between us." The simple honesty of his declaration moved Eleanor deeply. "I think," she said softly, "that it might be not only possible, but already beginning." Edmund's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, his touch warm and unexpectedly gentle for a man of such commanding presence. "Then I would court you properly, as I should have done from the beginning, not with financial rescue or legal contracts, but with the attention and regard you deserve." "We have begun rather backward, have we not?" Eleanor observed with a small smile. "Marriage first, courtship after. An unconventional approach for an unconventional duchess," he replied, a genuine smile transforming his features from handsome to almost boyishly charming. "Will you allow me to remedy my oversight, to show you not merely respect but genuine affection?" Eleanor felt as though her heart might overflow with unexpected joy. "I would like that very much." The moment hung between them, fragile and precious as blown glass. Edmund's hand rose to her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "May I?" he whispered, his intent clear in his gaze. Eleanor nodded, unable to find words as he leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Unlike the brief formal contact that had sealed their wedding vows, this kiss spoke of genuine feeling, of possibilities unfurling between them like flowers opening to the sun. When they parted, Edmund's expression held wonder, as if he had discovered something precious he had not dared hope to find. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For seeing beyond the Duke of Wintour to the man beneath, for bringing warmth back to these cold halls." His voice dropped lower, intimate in its honesty. "For reminding me that duty without feeling is an empty vessel." A knock at the drawing-room door interrupted the moment. With visible reluctance, Edmund stepped back, resuming a more proper distance before calling, "Enter." A footman appeared, bearing a silver salver with a letter upon it. "Urgent correspondence for your grace, delivered by special messenger." Edmund accepted the letter with a nod of dismissal. As the footman departed, he broke the seal and unfolded the missive, his expression darkening as he read its contents. "Troubling news?" Eleanor inquired, concerned by the sudden change in his demeanor. "Potentially." He refolded the letter with precise movements. "Sir Adrian Crowell has apparently been spreading certain insinuations regarding our marriage in London society circles." Eleanor felt a chill of apprehension. "What sort of insinuations?" "The letter is not specific, only that he has been most indiscreet in his speculations about the circumstances of our union." Edmund's jaw tightened. "It appears our confrontation at the village fete has inspired him to more calculated mischief." "What will you do?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. "I must go to London," he replied, his expression grim. "Such rumors, left unchecked, could do real damage. Not to me, for my position is secure, but to you." "Then I shall accompany you," Eleanor declared without hesitation. Edmund's surprise was evident. The London season does not begin for months. Society will be limited and the circumstances uncomfortable. "Nevertheless, I am your Duchess. If my reputation is at stake, I should face the challenge directly rather than hiding in the country like a guilty secret." Eleanor straightened, drawing upon all her natural dignity. "Unless you prefer I remain here." Something like pride flickered in Edmund's eyes. "I would be honored by your company, if you are certain." "I am." Eleanor moved to stand beside him, a physical demonstration of her resolve. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow, if arrangements can be made so quickly." He took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both courtly and intimate. "I did not anticipate this test of our new understanding coming quite so soon." "Nor did I," Eleanor admitted. "But perhaps it is fitting. If we are to build a true marriage, as you suggested, we should face its challenges together from the beginning." Edmund's fingers tightened around hers. "Together, then. And may Sir Adrian Crowell regret his decision to make an enemy of the Duke and Duchess of Winter." Outside the window, a lone rider approached along the gravel drive, Dr. Everin returning for a final check on the Duke's condition. But within the drawing room, something new had taken root between its occupants, a fragile trust blossoming towards something that might, with care and courage, grow into love. The mantel clock struck 4, its chimes marking not merely the hour, but the commencement of a journey neither had anticipated when they stood before the altar as strangers bound by contract and necessity. Now they would face London society as allies, perhaps even as true husband and wife. Spring came to Winter Hall in gentle waves of green and gold, as if nature itself celebrated the transformation that had occurred within its stone walls. The gardens, once rigidly maintained in formal patterns, now featured wildflower borders and meandering paths that invited leisurely exploration rather than merely offering impressive vistas. Eleanor stood at the library window, watching as gardeners planted new rose bushes along the southern terrace, varieties she had selected personally during their sojourn in London. The morning sun caught in her hair, illuminating threads of copper among the rich brown, and gleamed upon the gold band that had, over the past 6 months, come to represent not obligation, but choice. "Admiring your handiwork?" came Edmund's voice from the doorway. She turned with a smile, still marveling at how her heart quickened at the sight of him. "Hardly handiwork when others do the actual planting. I merely pointed and decreed." "The privilege of your position," he replied, crossing the room to join her at the window, "though you exercise it with considerably more restraint than most duchesses of my acquaintance, perhaps because I still remember what it is to serve rather than be served." Eleanor leaned slightly against him as his arm encircled her waist, a casual intimacy that would have been unimaginable in the early days of their marriage. Their journey to London had proven a turning point in their relationship. Faced with Sir Adrian's malicious insinuations in society, they had presented a united front that surprised and ultimately silenced the gossips. Edmund had been magnificent, cold fury controlled beneath impeccable manners as he systematically dismantled Adrian's credibility in the clubs and drawing rooms of Mayfair. But it had been Eleanor who delivered the final blow, confronting Adrian directly at Lady Harrington's winter musicale, the very event where Edmund had first observed her years before. "I understand you have taken considerable interest in the circumstances of my marriage, Sir Adrian," she had said, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard by those nearby. Such concern might be touching, were it not so evidently motivated by wounded pride and petty malice. Adrian had blanched, his practiced charm deserting him beneath the collective gaze of the assembled company. "I assure you, Duchess, any remarks I may have made were merely the desperate attempts of a man who abandoned a friend in adversity, only to find that friend elevated beyond his reach," she had interrupted, her tone gentle but implacable. "How fortunate I am that the Duke of Windsor possesses greater constancy of character." The incident had effectively ended Adrian's social aspirations. Within a fortnight, he had departed for the continent, ostensibly for his health, but in reality fleeing the cold shoulders that had replaced welcoming smiles throughout London society. More importantly, the crisis had cemented Eleanor and Edmund's partnership in ways neither had anticipated. Sharing quarters in Edmund's London house, planning strategy over private dinners, presenting themselves to society as a couple genuinely in accord, all had accelerated the courtship he had promised at Winter Hall. By the time they returned to the country, the theoretical boundaries of their marriage had dissolved entirely. Edmund had moved his personal possessions to the connecting door between their chambers, was left permanently unlocked. "The roses should bloom magnificently by midsummer," Edmund observed, drawing Eleanor back to the present moment, "just in time for the garden party." "If the weather cooperates," she agreed. "Augusta is convinced we're tempting fate by planning such an extensive entertainment. Augusta enjoys predicting disaster almost as much as she enjoys being proven wrong." Edmund's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Speaking of my sister, she has invited Dr. Heverin to dine with us again this evening." Eleanor glanced up, noting the subtle amusement in her husband's expression. "The 3rd time this month. Do you think she realizes how transparent her interest has become?" "Augusta? Transparent?" Edmund chuckled, the sound still rare enough to delight Eleanor's ears. "She believes herself the very model of sophisticated discretion, while Thomas blushes like a schoolboy whenever she addresses him directly." Eleanor smiled at the memory of the doctor's flustered reaction to Augusta's mildly flirtatious comments at their last dinner. "It's rather sweet, actually." "Sweet is not a word I ever expected to associate with my formidable sister," Edmund replied dryly. "But I find I do not object to the possibility. Thomas is a good man, one of the few I trust implicitly." "High praise indeed from the Duke of Windsor." Eleanor turned within the circle of his arm to face him fully. You've grown more generous with your trust, I think, only where it is deserved. His gaze softened as it rested upon her face. You have taught me that much, at least. The simple honesty of his words touched Eleanor deeply. In the months since their confrontation with Adrian in London, Edmund had gradually opened himself to her, sharing the pain of his first marriage, the devastating loss of his son, the guilt he had carried for years. In turn, she had confided her fears during her family's disgrace, her determination to protect her younger sister, her resolve never to marry without genuine affection. Each confidence exchanged, each vulnerability revealed, had strengthened the bond between them, transforming an arrangement of convenience into something neither had dared hope for when standing before the vicar those many months ago. I have news, Edmund said, his tone shifting to one of contained excitement. The solicitor has completed the arrangements for the school. Eleanor's eyes widened. Truly, everything is finalized. Indeed, construction can begin next month, with completion expected by Christmas. Pride colored his voice as he continued. The Whitcomb Memorial School for Girls will open its doors with the new year. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. The school had been her idea, a way to honor her father's memory by providing education for the daughters of tenants and villagers who could not afford formal schooling. Edmund had embraced the concept with unexpected enthusiasm, expanding her modest proposal into a substantial institution with accommodations for 40 students and quarters for 3 teachers. I cannot thank you enough, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. My father would be so proud to have his name associated with such an endeavor. It is I who should thank you, Edmund replied, covering her hand with his own, for showing me that Winter's wealth can build more than merely Winter's prestige. A comfortable silence fell between them as they stood together in the morning light. Outside, the gardeners continued their work, transforming the formal landscape into something more welcoming, more alive, much as Eleanor had transformed Winter Hall itself. No longer did servants move in fearful silence through hushed corridors. No longer did the Duke dine alone at the head of a massive table, surrounded by empty chairs and colder memories. Music filled the once silent rooms. Laughter echoed in galleries that had known only whispers for 7 long years. Do you regret it? Eleanor asked suddenly, voicing a question that had lingered at the edges of her mind despite the happiness of recent months. Regret what? Edmund's brow furrowed slightly in confusion. Marrying me, changing the terms of our arrangement, opening yourself to... She hesitated, still uncertain whether to name the feeling that had grown between them. Edmund's expression softened into tenderness. How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life? You have brought light where there was darkness, warmth where there was only cold. His voice dropped lower, intimate in its honesty. You have taught me that duty without love is an empty vessel indeed. Love. The word hung between them, spoken at last after months of demonstration, through countless small kindnesses, thoughtful gestures, and gradually increasing intimacy. I do love you, Eleanor whispered, the declaration both frightening and liberating. I think perhaps I began to love you the moment you gave me back my mother's locket. Edmund's arms tightened around her, drawing her close against his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. And I have loved you since I watched you play Beethoven in a room full of chattering socialites, your face transformed by music into something so beautiful it stopped my breath. He kissed her then, not the tentative, gentle kiss of their first true embrace in the drawing room, but something deeper, richer, filled with the certainty of reciprocated feeling. Eleanor returned his kiss with equal fervor, her arms twining around his neck as the last barriers between them dissolved in the morning sunlight. When they finally parted, Edmund rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. I had not thought to find this again, or perhaps to find it truly for the first time. Nor I, Eleanor admitted. When I agreed to our marriage, I hoped only for security, and perhaps, in time, companionable respect. And now I find myself embarrassingly grateful for my father's financial ruin, she replied with a small laugh. For without it, I might never have become your Duchess. Edmund smiled, the expression now more frequent but no less precious for its increased appearance. Then we shall include gratitude among the many virtues taught at the Whitcomb School. A knock at the library door interrupted their private moment. With reluctance, they separated to a more proper distance before Edmund called, "Enter." Mrs. Winters appeared, her usually stern countenance softened by what might almost have been a smile. "Begging your Grace's pardon, but the Norton children have arrived with the first flowers from their new cottage garden. They particularly wished to present them to the Duchess. By all means, show them in, Eleanor replied, delighted by the unexpected visit. The Norton children, Mary, John, and little Beatrice, entered shyly, each clutching small bunches of early spring blossoms. They had prospered in the month since the fire. Their father's hands healed well enough to resume his carpentry, their new cottage built larger and sturdier than the one destroyed by flames. "For you, Your Grace," Mary, the eldest at 9 years, said with a careful curtsy as she presented her flowers. "Mother says they're nothing grand, but they're the first blooms from the seeds you gave us." Eleanor accepted the humble offering with genuine pleasure. "They're beautiful, Mary, and all the more precious for being grown with your own hands." Little Beatrice, barely 5, sidled closer to Edmund, looking up at his imposing height with more curiosity than fear. "We growed them special," she announced with childish directness, "'cause you and the Duchess was kind when our house burned up." Edmund, to Eleanor's delight, and Mrs. Winter's poorly concealed astonishment, knelt to the child's level. "That was no more than you deserved," he said gravely. "Wintour takes care of its own." The simple interaction, so natural yet so at odds with the cold, distant Duke who had first brought Eleanor to Wintour Hall, crystallized the transformation of recent months. As the children were ushered out with promises of cake from the kitchen, Eleanor felt a wave of profound contentment wash over her. "What are you thinking?" Edmund asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "I was thinking," Eleanor replied slowly, "of the strange paths that lead us to happiness, how what seems at first a misfortune may prove instead the beginning of something wonderful." Edmund took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that had become familiar, but never commonplace. "From duty to devotion," he murmured against her skin, "from arrangement to affection. From the coldest duke to the warmest husband," Eleanor completed with a smile, her free hand rising to touch the locket that still hung at her throat, no longer a symbol of what she had lost but of all she had gained. Outside, spring sunlight bathed the gardens in golden warmth. Within, 2 hearts once shielded by caution and circumstance beat in newfound harmony. And throughout Winter Hall, from servants' quarters to grand galleries, the transformation was complete. Where once coldness had reigned, warmth now flourished. Where silence had echoed, laughter resounded. Where duty alone had sustained, love now nourished. Eleanor leaned against her husband's side, his arm settling naturally around her shoulders as they gazed out at the blooming gardens that mirrored their own unexpected flowering. The morning stretched before them, filled with possibilities neither could have imagined on that misty wedding day that now seemed a lifetime ago. "Shall we walk in the gardens?" Edmund suggested, his voice warm with affection. "I believe the first lilies are opening near the pond." "I would like that very much," Eleanor replied, taking his offered arm. Together they stepped into the sunshine, the Duke and his once reluctant bride, now bound by choice rather than circumstance, by love rather than law. Behind them, the white roses on the library table, descendants of that first meaningful gift, released their delicate fragrance into the air, perfuming the room where a cold heart had first begun to thaw beneath the gentle warmth of understanding. And as spring bloomed around Winter Hall, so too did the love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings, a forced marriage to the coldest duke, a bowed head, and a first gift that had brought tears to transform 2 lives forever. In the quiet chambers of our hearts, we often build walls of duty and propriety, believing they will protect us from life's sorrows. Yet in doing so, we may inadvertently imprison ourselves within cold fortresses of our own making. The true courage lies not in perfect strength, but in the willingness to be vulnerable again after pain has taught us caution. Edmund and Eleanor's journey reminds us that sometimes what appears to be our greatest misfortune, a forced marriage, a family's disgrace, may actually be the doorway to unexpected grace. Love does not always announce itself with passionate declarations or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it grows silently in the space between duty and kindness, in small moments of recognition, when one soul truly sees another. It flourishes not in perfect circumstances, but in imperfect hearts, willing to risk disappointment for the possibility of joy. Perhaps the most profound transformation is not from poverty to wealth or from disgrace to title, but from isolation to connection, from believing oneself beyond the reach of genuine understanding to discovering that even the coldest heart can thaw under the patient warmth of compassionate love. In a world that often values appearance over substance, remember that true nobility lies not in titles or possessions, but in the courage to remove our protective masks and allow ourselves to be truly known. For it is only when we are seen, fully, honestly, compassionately, that our hearts can finally come home to themselves. Did this tale of unexpected love and transformation touch your heart? Subscribe now to receive more enchanting historical romances that will transport you to worlds where duty and desire dance in delicate balance, where proud hearts learn to bend, and where love proves the greatest healer of wounded souls. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Eleanor's quiet strength inspire you? Did Edmund's journey from cold duty to warm devotion remind you that change is possible even for the most guarded hearts? Your reflections mean the world to our community of romance enthusiasts. Remember, every great love story begins with a first step into vulnerability. Take yours today by joining our family of readers who believe in the transformative power of love. One page, one heart, one story at a time.